Random Rab, welcome to the show. Great to have you.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, it's a real honor to have you here. I've been a fanboy for many years of your work, and I remember approaching you at, I think, more than one show in a kind of hysterical teenager-y way, saying, hey, I use your music to help people heal with MDMA therapy and with MAFs, and it's so amazing to use your music to help people get well. And it's huge, what your work is doing in the world around healing. And I'm just really grateful for the contributions that you're making.
Well, thank you. Yeah, it's a huge honor that my music can be used in different ways that I never even really expected. So it's always like, what an awesome thing to learn that like it's out there working for me even when I'm not. So yeah, I love hearing that.
Cool. Yeah, it's kind of the subject of our show today that we wanted to get into with you, is this whole vortex of healing, of spirituality, of music, and the role that music can play in deepening in people's lives, and then feeling more connected to themselves and to the universe.
Mm-hmm.
So really psyched for this conversation.
Glad to be here.
So I wonder if we could start with maybe a personal place of what music has meant to you in your life, in your journey as a human being, and what are some of the different roles that it's played for you?
Well, I think we all start as fans, that's kind of how is an interest in music as like a listener. And, like in high school and stuff, and I played in bands and whatnot, but I think over the course of when you start to become a producer and really dive in deeper and deeper into it, it slowly becomes kind of an integration into who you are as a person. And the music becomes kind of, a way to work through different parts, your thoughts and emotions in your brain. And it becomes kind of almost like a necessary tool to help move things around and experience different emotions and share different emotions. So now it's almost like sometimes I forget that I'm even really kind of making music. I feel like I'm just experiencing myself at this point when I'm producing. And then I kind of zoom out and I'm like, oh yeah, I guess I'm working on a track instead of just working on myself and working on my mind. It just becomes, like I said, it kind of becomes slowly, or it has become for me, like just slowly integrated into my psyche and into my soul and into my skin and everything of who I am at this point. So yeah, it's a slight obsession, but I guess that's like the key is to do what you love. So I'm happy to be doing it.
For you, is you create different pieces. Is it just very like a creative, spontaneous process, and the end piece didn't really start with a big intention or some intention of healing something specific? Is it just more a big creative kind of outpouring, and then there's this piece that gets created from that? Or are you ever kind of bringing more of an intention behind certain tracks and certain things you're trying to create in order to evoke certain experiences?
I mean, it's always a mixed bag. It's for me, it's sort of half science and half artistry, I guess, is the way I approach it. So a lot of what I do it's really technical. It's like, figuring out how to process a certain sound to get it to sound interesting or have more bass or balance things out. And so there's a lot of it's very technical. So you do end up spending a lot of time to sort of in that part of your brain where you're working with more kind of like mathematical understanding of what sound is, and then setting yourself up for a flow state. That's kind of how it usually works for me, is I'll get to a point where, and sort of like I was saying before, I almost forget that I'm working on music. It just becomes and that's when I know it's like, it's good, or it's going to be something that I'm going to want to share, is when I can get into that flow state with a piece of music and just spend hours and hours and hours, and I never want to stop. And I know the song is done basically when I'm kind of tired of working on it, or I can't get, I just get pulled out of the flow state and start overthinking small details. So is there intention? Yes, there's always intention, but it's really easy to kind of, if you're using too much, I guess, intention of what you think the piece is going to be in the beginning, then that can be very limiting to where it might actually take you. It can be completely, maybe this where the song wants to go is something completely different than what you intended. So unless I'm doing a project that's like more of a commercial piece or a piece that's like kind of has a place in like a movie or something where it's very specific. I usually just like completely let go of what I think the song should be and just go where I feel like it should go. And yeah, I'm always surprised what ends up happening. Cause it's really hard to create sound that you want to create. It's more like finding things that are interesting and then pursuing them and enhancing them. So that can be, it's always, rolling the dice. In fact, I have like a whole bunch of dice here that I keep on my desk to remind me of all the of the chances of sort of experimentation.
Nice. Yeah. Maybe share a little bit more about, you said how much music has transformed you, and the creation of music. And I'm just curious if you can articulate that in some way to kind of explain that to people listening, of like, because you're you're such a involved musician, you've been at this so long and out there in the world bringing this music to so many people. Like, how do you personally, if we just talk about you first, like how has music transformed you?
I sort of, it's transformed me so completely that it's hard to even really know what I would be without it at this point. But if I could try to articulate it, the way I feel is that every sound is kind of directly connected to an emotion, and it's a really complex sort of grid of emotions that we all can feel, like, happy, sad, joy, sorrow, confusion, fear. And it's really hard to directly access one particular emotion. Everything's kind of interconnected. And so it's a kind of a cosmic puzzle that plays out in our brain. So we can have, experience like the sorrow of existence and still feel joy, or we can be in fear, but then still feel excitement from that. So it's all these like little nuanced emotions that are all interconnected. So the way that I feel like when I'm working with music is like accessing emotions that I want to feel. I want to feel good. I want to feel feelings that really lift me up or make me think about something in a certain way, or basically bring me to a place emotionally that feels like I'm here in the now and experiencing life to its fullest. So I often, when I'm working, I'm just going with what I want to feel. And so by doing that process, it feels really good. You start to dig in and start to process, or me rather, memories will come up or feelings, and it gives me an opportunity to sort of work through emotions that would otherwise become stagnant or just get pushed away. Quite often I'll be producing a track and have like a total existential crisis in the middle of working on a song. I have to pace around my studio for a few minutes to work at some feeling will come up that I wasn't expecting, and then I kind of work through that and process it. And so it's kind of like, medicine in a way, very self-healing. And so it gives me personally an opportunity to get in there and make myself feel good. And so it's become, like I said, almost like fully integrated into who I am as a person. Because without it, I start to kind of get really congested feeling emotionally and mentally, and I can't think straight. So it's really helped me be a happier person. And I think every artist kind of struggles sometimes with some aspect of depression or self-doubt. And by going into the craft and not thinking about the end results, it can really be beneficial to those feelings.
Yeah, that's really beautiful. I mean, I think as a healer or someone in the healing arts, I can relate to what you were just saying about that. There's healing in paying attention and being in the process rather than focusing on the result. or getting too mental or too wrapped up in the outcome that you're trying to get to.
Yeah, the outcome is really sort of secondary. It's an exciting part of it, and it's very awesome to be able to share it and to have a career and to do all these things. But at the end of the day, if that's your focus, that's kind of a trap, because you're always thinking about, you're never in the present moment with what you're doing. And what makes, with all art, but especially with music, it exists in time. You can't pause music and admire it. You have to experience it in the now. And so to really be able to create a good piece of music, you have to be extremely present. And that's sort of what's fascinating and interesting about how playing with time, basically.
Let's switch a little gears to playing live shows and well, actually, let's first start with, what was it like to not play live shows in COVID? And as you know, that's like part of who you were, I'm assuming, right? Like, it was that like kind of a part of your identity, like being up in these shows and the experience of that? Is that a pretty deep part of you?
A huge part. I mean, I've been doing it for, 20 years, playing shows like almost every weekend, and had some breaks along the way, but nothing like when COVID hit. And yeah, it was really weird. It was really, really bizarre. I mean, I don't want to complain about it, because I know that so many people had so much more suffering than I did, where I was just like, I can't play shows. But really, it was interesting to feel so disconnected from everyone and try to play these live streams. That was actually like that was the hardest, because there's like, I'd be there and by myself or just with my lady and Michelle, and just like, I'm like, this is so bizarre, not having an audience. So yeah, it was really weird. And like, it's coming back, and now it's coming back in full swing. It's been really kind of crazy to see how people are ready to party.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's crazy. And tell us a little bit about what it's like to play shows, and like, what do you experience when you're, guiding sometimes thousands of people like up there, and what's that like for you?
Usually it's the best feeling in the whole world. It's kind of, there's nothing quite like it. It's sort of, it just feels really good. It makes me feel really happy. It makes me feel like I'm sort of hanging out with every person in the entire room all at once. I'm having a conversation with every single person all at once, so it sort of cuts through some of my social awkwardness, where I'm like, okay, now I can have a conversation with 100 or 1,000 or more people all at the same time. And it's exhilarating, because you do feel kind of like this feedback loop. And if you can make other people happy, I mean, what could feel better than that? So I love seeing people have a good time and to make people happy.
Yeah. I'm assuming you've met a lot of interesting people along the way.
Oh gosh, the most incredible. I mean, that's sort of the biggest bonus to this whole thing, is the ability to, I guess, shortcut the social process of introducing yourself, meeting someone, getting to know someone. They start to trust you, you start to trust them, and then you're friends, I guess. And so with a show, you kind of like cut all the way to the chase. People who come to my shows kind of have a pretty good idea of who I am as a person, or at least what I stand for, or what kind of person I am. So the people I meet at these shows are the best. And that's just been such an incredible gift in this whole process. Is I've made the most amazing friends, and I feel a part of so many different communities. It's really incredible.
I'm wondering, as we're coming out, as you said, Rab, from the pandemic, and people are more. Well, hopefully we're coming out. I mean, you got this whole other Delta thing happening now, but what are you sensing in the audiences that you're playing to at this point in time? What are you feeling out there?
It's been kind of a interesting. People are ready to get down and have a good time and go nuts. But then there's also, there's kind of an impending fear some sort of doom around the corner. We all experienced what it was to do the lockdown the first time, and there's sort of this hint that it might happen again. A lot of the shows that I'm booked, I have been canceling shows as well that I've booked for the fall, because they're in areas that are everybody's just kind of freaking out about what might happen, and sort of covering their bases. So there's a lot of anxiety in the scene right now of, I guess, behind the scenes. And people are very cautious about, I just announced like a bunch of shows on the West Coast and in Seattle, Eugene, San Francisco, and each one of those shows is teetering on whether it actually might happen, because we don't know. And there's nobody I can call and ask, like, is it going to happen? Is it not? It's just no way to know. So I'm hoping that we can get this, thing under control. But that being said, the shows that have been happening, it's been really exhilarating. People are ready to jump off the walls. So it's been pretty fun, feeling like this taste of what total freedom might feel like again.
I wonder what your thoughts are about, for me, it comes up a lot in my mind of how do we live fully knowing that, there could be an impending thing that could happen, whether it's pandemic or whether it's, getting older, dying, whatever the thing is in front of us. Like there's always something in front of us, right? We could get sick or whatever can happen, but what is your take on, is it, can you say more about living in the present moment or, living in flow? And is that how you relate to it as far as like, the quality of life or living a spiritually fulfilling life is being in the present moment?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that, there are times where, like, just in that conversation we were just talking about, where I can like look at my bank statement and think, okay, I'm taking on a bunch of expenses in my life, and now I have these shows that might get canceled, and I don't know, and I can worry, and I do sometimes get in that state of mind, like, oh, what's going to happen? But like I said, there's no way to know. So what are we doing if we're just living in fear? So yes, it's become critical for me to really be in the present moment, and that's sort of how I live my life at this point. Riding the now like a wave. And because life, it's just, we only get one shot, and I want to do it right, and I want to have the best time ever. And, so that's sort of my goal and experience of things right now.
Yeah.
Is music a big part of your family's existence? Like, are you guys listening to music a lot?
We did when I was younger. My dad was always playing classical music, a lot of records, and he was a singer. And so he'd walk around the house singing in his baritone voice, which I thought was amusing as a kid, but, yeah. And my mom is, the furthest thing from a musician, but she appreciates music. But yeah, so music was a big part of my life growing up for sure, but mostly through things like church choir and, that type of, I didn't really discover, I guess, my own sound until probably like 18 or 19 years old. I discovered, I could make my own music.
So it happened around then when you started really getting into making music. And when did you start realizing you were like on a path of basically making it a career and really going for it? When did that start happening?
It was, I guess, like in high school, I was in like a heavy metal band, did this thing for like 5 years. And, I wanted to be, at that point, I just wanted to be in a band, I just wanted to be like, I guess, famous. I was young and naive about I didn't really understand. It wasn't really the music itself. It was just sort of the world around it that I was mostly interested in me, It wasn't until I really took mushrooms for the first time that I had a transformational experience about experiencing music in a completely different way. It no longer was an identity thing. Whereas, when you're kids and you're like, okay, this is my favorite band. It's kind of like, that's your identity. I'm into Rage Against the Machine, or I'm into Metallica, or I'm into whatever. This is who I am as a person. And that was sort of how I related to music. And I didn't really ever understand what the power of music really was until I took mushrooms and understood that there was a much more psychospiritual connection, and that music was a tool to kind of lubricate the senses and sort of dissolve the divisions between the different dimensions of our mind and reality itself. There's a connection to what music is and how the flow of the universe and the planets revolve around the sun, and the mathematical principles that sort of hold the universe together, and it's all interconnected somehow, very mysteriously, but very real. So before, what was really a fascination with sort of songs and shows and bands and identity turned into more of a real relationship between what the mystery and power of music itself was. And that's sort of been the path I've been on ever since. And so whether or not, there were decisions along the way about career and, quitting my job and all these different things, but it was always secondary to the passion and the love and the obsession that I had with trying to understand the power of music and what music really is. And that's sort of been my study and my guiding force to this day. I still don't really understand exactly what music is. And I feel like that's sort of the goal with this whole thing, is that I'm hoping that maybe like I'll have a glimmer right before I die, like, oh, I get it. And
I'm hoping that too.
Yeah, yeah.
Hopefully.
Yeah.
Like, oh, that's what this was.
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. So how old are you?
I'm 45.
45. So I'm 45. So were you into did you get into the rave scene in like the mid 90s, early 2000s? Were you into that whole scene with like trance music and everything?
Not really at all, actually. I had never really been to, I'm not even sure if I've ever been to a rave yet. I think so. Maybe I've played some. Right. No, I actually didn't really even like electronic music around, until probably like 98, 99. I started to kind of tune into it. But for me, it was more kind of like, psychedelic ambient music was sort of what drew me in at first. And so I didn't really understand trance music or anything. And I never even really understood trance until probably like a few years ago. So, I was more into like concerts, like I said, like metal and those types of things. And it slowly, as I got into ambient and started creating ambient music around the millennium, is when I really started to kind of tune into electronic music, but I never really started going to electronic shows until much, much later, except for the ones that I was playing. So I sort of felt like I was like on my own path for a really long time and sort of converged with the scene as a producer.
Were there any like influential musicians when you started really coming into your own style that you were listening to, or it was just really organic and kind of came out of nowhere for you?
I think in the beginning I remember like with electronic music in particular, Tangerine Dream was a big, just hearing like arpeggios for the first time. Like I didn't really.
That's such a blast from the past. I haven't listened to those guys in 20 years. Like I'm like, all right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And they were doing stuff that was so cutting edge. And I just remember sitting in front of my speaker, like, what is happening? And how I didn't even understand like just how it was such a mystery to me of just what an arpeggio, how do you make an arpeggio? I remember thinking, I thought you just had to play it really fast. I had no concept that there was like a sequencer and that's sort of blew my mind as I started to get into that. But yeah, it's always my influences I've always been sort of finding influence in music that's really unlike my own, that's sort of what I listen to now mostly, except for my friends' music, I guess. It's just an interesting, once I've gotten to this point where I am with my music, I kind of have a hard time really, really listening or appreciating music that's somewhat similar to mine. without really overthinking it. So I have to really force myself to kind of get out of that mindset and in order to really appreciate it the way I used to, I guess.
I'd like to go back for a minute, Rab, if you're open to it, to this pivotal psilocybin experience that you talked about. And I think did you say you were about 18 or 19 or something like that? When
that was actually, I was 20, maybe 21. Yeah.
Okay. 21. Yeah. And it sounds like there was just a massive shift in your relationship with music and that. And it reminds me of, there's this kind of, I tend to think of like the personality as like a middleman between like the inner divinity and the ambient divinity, if you will. And like with psychedelics used in the right situation, the right context, right set and setting, you know, there can be like this dissolving of the veil between the inner divinity and the outer divinity, or the not outer, but the everywhere divinity. And I just wonder about whether, is it fair that did that become a benchmark for you, as far as like, you've talked about like going into flow states and creating music and then kind of noticing that you're done working with a track when, you know, the little voices or little thoughts start coming in and you see yourself kind of leaving a flow state, and it's like, okay, I'm done working on that. Have psychedelics been like a way for you to, has it become like a touchstone where you kind of know when you're in more of a, you know, overthinking mentality with regard to something versus like being in a flow with it?
Yes, absolutely. I think that, like you said, I liked the way you said the ambient divinity, and the dissolving of self, having never experienced that before. And then taking mushrooms for the first time and sort of feeling for the first time like it wasn't just me as a person, kind of like a ball floating around this outer world, like sort of dissolving like an ice cube into it. And I think that, like I said, as a touchstone, I think that had I never done mushrooms ever again or any psychedelics, I would probably have been completely fine. I only really needed that one time to understand that, and to understand how through music I can reach that same state of mind. The power that I've found in music, I mean, it's been the most psychedelic. Creating music, especially for me, has been the most psychedelic thing I could possibly imagine. I've just gotten into places with it where I'll actually start hallucinating auditorily or with my eyes even, and start to feel something sort of arise where I start to dissolve into the music itself. And knowing that it's okay and it can be a really joyous thing and feel good. And so, yeah, it's a critical part of my journey. I can't really imagine. I think it could be done with having never done it through like meditation and those higher forms of spiritual practice. I just don't have the time or the patience for that, and I don't think I ever would have. So yeah, it was a really necessary kind of turnkey moment where I understood what my path was and how to sort of interact with something in that way, with the ambient divinity of what's happening around.
That's really cool. And I wonder if over time, has it become easier for you to kind of access those states through practice with music?
Yes and no. I mean, yes, I guess from a technical proficiency level, absolutely. I can sit down and I don't have to like bust out the manuals or think about it too much in order to figure out how to make a song. But accessing the creative space, sort of like that, getting into that flow state, that is really a challenge. That can be a challenge. And I have to be basically in a good headspace. If I'm not feeling good, my body's whacked, or I haven't slept, or I have a lot of stuff going in my life that's like just too stressful, then I kind of feel like I'm like beating myself and nothing's happening that's working. So it's really important to have your life sort of together, or at least for me. Some people work great under depression and stress, where I find that I work more effectively when I'm feeling kind of like not a lot of anxiety and not a lot of stress and not a lot of heartache. And I find that like if I'm feeling good, then that's when the good music happens. So can't forget what the original question was, but that's sort of my roundabout way of answering it.
Yeah, thanks. And I'm also interested in in psychology we talk about attunement with our kids, right, and other people, and like we're attuning to their psycho-emotional presence and responding. And I'm wondering your thoughts on like, well, how does that play out are you attuning to the crowd when you're playing music, and like, or are you just in your own flow state and something's flowing through you? Or are you somehow tracking the crowd and like there's some kind of back and forth process?
Yeah, there's absolutely, yes. I mean, as a performer, you're going to have your good nights and your bad nights, where sometimes it is much more internal, where I do kind of feel like I'm not connecting for whatever reason. That's, for me personally, more rare. But when it's really happening, it's almost like there's like this invisible heart in the middle of the dance floor that I can like look out and see it. And I'm not really looking at any person in particular. It's just sort of the vibe. And I think there's some part of our lizard brain that can kind of pick up on the subtle cues of how a crowd is reacting like an organism. And especially like when you get a really substantial audience, you can't really see anybody in particular, but you can just see the movement of energy and feel. And that's the best feeling, when you start to feel like you're actually interacting with this sort of massive organism, and you become a part of it. And you're no longer really thinking for yourself. You're just making decisions sort of instinctually based on where you know that it needs to go. And that's such a great feeling, where it just becomes really easy at that point. It stops being hard. When it's hard, it's like something's wrong. Like I know, like when like Alex Honnold was, the climber, he was talking about when he does these free climbs up like these massive things. He said when he starts to get scared or something, then he knows that something's wrong. Something's not right, and he needs to make a decision to like get out of that space. So that's sort of like the same feeling for me. It's like if I start to get intimidated or scared or feel like I'm going to make a mistake, that's what I know something's wrong with how I'm connecting with that sort of giant heartbeat on the dance floor.
So sometimes it sounds like you'll like start going into a stress response of some sort in your system, where you're like either getting a little nervous or you're getting in your head or something.
Yeah, I kind of think of it as sort of like fear. You start to fear your audience, and that's like the biggest mistake you can possibly make as a performer, when you get into that place when you become intimidated by the audience. And it's not really necessarily because anyone's booing you, or because maybe people are loving it, but you feel like you're kind of like one step behind, and you're getting kind of run over rather than you're like riding the train and not driving it. And you have to sort of force yourself to get ahead of it. And a lot of times it's like getting into the music itself, like dancing while, you're playing, or just really starting to feel it. Because if you're just, it can happen. Sometimes you just start to stand there. You're like, what am I doing up here? And so that's part of being a performer, is learning how to overcome that, fear and that kind of like intimidation factor. And so it happens less and less now. I kind of like, I've learned to basically not give a shit as much. But it's in the beginning, I remember a lot of shows of being like just really nervous and scared of the audience, that I'm going to disappoint them or something like that. And it's important to learn how to overcome that.
Yeah. Wow. That's just quite a psychological process performers have to go through, of like just getting used to that I mean, because you gotta face yourself up there, right? Like you're facing things, especially when you're not in the flow state. You're gonna start facing something.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
Which is why, it can be, that's why it feels so good, is because maybe you walk into the show and you've had a bad day, you just got in a fight with somebody or whatever. You're just kind of like, I just don't feel that great. I don't really want to play tonight. You're kind of down. You're like, what am I even doing here? You get on stage and you start to play and you're like, oh my gosh, like I'm not here right now. And then like, I have to be here to take this very seriously. I'm going to get into the mode. I'm going to give it my all. And then slowly you kind of become one with the show, and then you start to feel really good, and then the show's over. You're like, I feel great. I can't even remember what was upsetting me before. I don't even remember. It's just kind of like that feeling is. It's a big buzz you get from it afterward. You're like, and then I'm like social and talking to everyone, and and so I see it myself almost every night. Where it's like right before my show, I'm really like inward and tired and quiet, and then afterwards, I'm like, I can't shut up. So, there's something. It feels really good.
Nice. Well, for people who haven't really gotten to your music yet, is there some song or track or something you would like? Yeah, start here. Like, check this out first. This is something. Anything you want to kind of tell them?
I guess these days, probably "Give Me That Hope" would be the song I'd probably recommend people check out first, just because it just seems so poignant with this time that we're in right now, and maybe that's what we need more than anything. So that's like the beginning process. I mean, beyond that, I think it's really about just I have a pretty broad spectrum of types of music that I've created, whether it's really chill down tempo to really fast dance music. So it's kind of where you want to go at that point. So I think it's just kind of, that's a good place to dive in though.
Nice. Well, as we wrap up, did you have something, Will, before we wrap up?
I just had one more question before we start heading toward wrapping up. I'm curious, Rab, just from your perspective, like, to me, it seems like, we have this, we have a lot of challenges as a species, and one of the hard challenges, I think, is kind of like an undercurrent of what we're talking about here today. Is like, how do I actually be present in my life and not be, panicked or operating from fear or be in my head and live from my head. And I'm curious if you've thought about, the role of music in regards to, like, I mean, obviously there's no easy answers for a species, but music's been with us for a long time, right? I mean, as soon as somebody could, beat a stick on a tree, or, hollow out something and put a skin on it and make a drum, or do you have a vision of like what needs to change? I mean, as far as like in terms of music and humanity, like,
well,
people used to go to church and they would listen to, they would listen to the choir, or they would listen to beautiful music, and now people go to Burning Man or go to shows, or, they put a record on in their living room. Or just wondering what you have to say about that.
I think that it's really important to recognize, like, for me, like I said, music is a tool, and it's the thing that brings you into the present moment and helps you actually experience the now in a way that really nothing else can. In the greatest celebrations of our life, or those greatest moments that we look back on, quite often music was there. Music is like any, what's a wedding without music? What's a funeral without music? What's really any kind of gathering? It just almost isn't real unless music is there. And, whether that's even in the background, or, have you ever had someone over to your house and you're like, why does it feel so awkward? And like, oh, because there's no music playing. Put a little music on. You're like, okay, now we can like be in the present moment and not in our heads so much. And I think that celebration with music is so critical to who we are as a species that I think we really, as a species, need to really value it more. And I don't really mean like value like me. I'm saying that as a musician, like, oh, I should be valued in our society. What I'm talking about is music itself, and gathering and celebration need to be really critical values for us. And so when we start to cut them out of our lives, like during the pandemic, how like, okay, no shows, socially distanced shows. And I mean, I think that a lot of people were going crazy, just not having an opportunity to celebrate and get together. And it wasn't really seen as sort of a critical part of who we are as a society, when in actuality it is, and maybe a hell of a lot more important than making sure that the DMV stays open or something like that. We should really find ways to prioritize gathering and safely, and to use music, because life is, we've become so disconnected from the present moment as a species. We're always worried about our 401k and our kids' future and what's going to, our jobs and all these different things that are like really not related to the now. And they're really related to the story that we want to write about ourselves. And if without the experience of the now and the celebration of the now, it makes anyone insane. It makes everyone, it leads to really a dark place. So I think we need to really not feel bad about celebrating, and really let go of the guilt and shame around getting together, and not see it as sort of like some sort of opulent thing we do just for fun every once in a while, but really a critical part of who we are as a species, and how important it is as people to do that and to experience true joy in our lives, and not just the satisfaction that we get from more mundane things like our jobs and things.
Beautiful.
Thank you. That's powerful. Something really linked up for me on this last thing you said. When you said celebrate the now and you connected that to music, like that really hit something for me. I was just thinking before you said that of just, obviously for all of humanity, we come together in ritual with music and move our bodies together. And when you said celebrating the now, I'm like, right, we're coming together to celebrate that we're here.
Mm-hmm.
And we move together and we sing together and we dance and it's so critical, like you're saying, that like that is actually deeply respected in society. And we're, I think that you're right. Like I think we often view that more as like this entertaining, like let loose kind of venting place to just kind of like go over the top and lose ourselves. And it's actually a place to celebrate life together.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So yeah, that's just powerful when you said that. It's just like, right, like we come together as large groups of people to just celebrate.
Yeah, I think it's so important to be present with each other and to celebrate the now. And it's so easy to forget. And I think that's the role that music plays. And it's amazing.
This leads well into our last question we ask every guest, which is, and you kind of get to answer this question all the time anyways as a musician, but with music, but we'll ask it. So if you had a billboard everybody would see once in their life, there's a paragraph on it. Every human being would come past that billboard one time. What would you tell that person?
Oh man, the great billboard in the sky.
Yeah,
oh my gosh,
the great billboard in the sky, and you have a message to say to them.
Well, I think it probably wouldn't be my words. I'd probably just put the cover of this book up there. Probably, remember to.
Does that be here now?
Yeah, be here now. I think that would be the. Just remember to be here now. That'd probably be the thing I would want to quote from Ram Dass.
Well, he said it well. So. Great. Well, Rab, thanks so much. That was a great conversation.
Yeah, well, thanks for having me on, guys. I really appreciate it.